The Titanic disaster. Almost 100 years have passed and it's still in the imaginations of people. It's one of the most famous disasters in history. The band playing, the ship hitting the iceberg with the lights shining in the distance, the lack of lifeboats. No, don't worry, this isn't a conspiracy theory. I'm not going to ramble on about how someone else caused Titanic sinking. It was hit by a torpedo, the mummy, the running over Godzilla's fin. No, my theory is more lifeboats on the Titanic wouldn't have not saved lives. As a fact, Titanic carried 20 lifeboats. This consisted of 16 normal wooden lifeboats and 4 collapsibles, A, B, C and D. Now, these lifeboats have the capacity to fit 1,170 people, which for a ship that has the passenger capacity of 3,000 is quite obviously way below the standard. Titanic's lifeboat plan was based on the RMS Laconia, a Cunard ship in 1894. The regulations were set then, and a ship more than 10,000 tons can't carry more than 16 lifeboats. Now, since this regulation was still into practice, still in 1912, this meant that Titanic, a 40,000 ton ship, couldn't carry more than 16 lifeboats. But what did she have on board? She had 20. So in reality, she actually exceeded the Board of Trade regulations, and she was carrying more lifeboats than the law required to do so. Okay, so we've established the facts, but let's go on to the theory. We all know it took Titanic 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink, from hitting the iceberg at 11:40 to eventually sinking at 2 on April the 15th, 1912. Now, as many surviving witnesses would say, including Second Officer Charles Lightoller, who was a key surviving figure and the most senior surviving member on the ship, he specifically said, and it's a fact as we know, that collapsibles A and B were eventually floating off and unsuccessfully launched off the ship. This was primarily due to timing reasons. These lifeboats were launched about 2 in the morning of April 15th, and by that time the water had already reached the bridge of the ship. But there were still 2 lifeboats which hadn't been successfully launched, and 1,500 people on board. So what does this mean? Well, it means even if Titanic had her original plan of, I think it was 60 to 70 lifeboats, then we would have had over 50 or so lifeboats, 50 or 40 lifeboats going down with the ship unused. Because there wasn't enough time, there wouldn't have been enough time to launch any other lifeboats. So these theories which explain to why more lifeboats would have saved passengers' lives, in one respect they probably were correct, but in another you have to look back through history. History tells us that there wasn't enough time to launch successfully all the Titanic's lifeboats. In 2 hours and 40 minutes they failed to launch 20 lifeboats successfully. But this wasn't due to the crew's efforts. Passengers were reluctant to go into the boats. It took them ages to try and get the first passenger to go into the boats. The ship was standing 60 feet above the water, so it would have been an absolutely terrible occasion. And those first few people who've gone into the boats should always be rewarded for their bravery. Because this would have been a scary thing, a massive ship in the middle of the Atlantic, to find yourself all of a sudden go into a small tiny wooden boat surrounded by water thousands of miles apart, where you have the rest of the world on one side, the rest of the world on another really, and this giant ship which you thought was practically unsinkable has sunk. The real deal is the time it took Titanic to sink. Although 2 hours and 40 minutes compared to other shipping disasters is actually quite a reasonable time to sink, it wasn't enough to launch more than 20 lifeboats, and for that reason the more lifeboat theory on Titanic you could say is wrong. As for everyone else, well, if you don't know this theory then now you've been informed, but if you do then feel free to post a comment down below, and if you want to discuss it even more then feel free to do so. I'll write back to your comment and we could probably have a little discussion going. But as far as history is concerned, the more lifeboat plan wouldn't have worked, and there was nothing to do to have saved more passengers' lives, unfortunately, when the ship did hit the iceberg. The crew worked in all their ability to help save the ship. Words fail to describe how hard and brave the crew members were, but unfortunately it was all down to nature and physics and science on Titanic sinking, and why this ship sunk too quickly for all the lifeboats. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed my rant. But as for me, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.